Welcome to the world of science fiction and forgotten worlds. Alien Universe. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and never miss a new movies and story from this channel. First ship did not come with weapons. It came with a question. It appeared above Earth like a shadow that forgot to move. No flames, no thunder, no invasion alarm. Just a silent shape blocking the stars. People watched from rooftops, from deserts, from frozen fields, from crowded streets. Every camera pointed up. Every heart beat faster. Humanity had spent months raising children the galaxy had thrown away, and now the galaxy had finally come back. But the ship did not attack. A single beam of soft light touched the ground outside one of the haven centers. Soldiers surrounded the area. Scientists stood behind glass. Volunteers held the children close. The little ones who had once trembled at every sound now stared upward with wide eyes, not in fear, but in recognition. One of them stepped forward. It was a small boy with pale blue skin and thin silver lines across his face, like tears that had turned into metal. He had arrived in the third wave of pods, barely able to speak, barely able to stand. For weeks he had refused to sleep unless someone held his hand. Now he walked alone toward the light, his steps slow but steady. People shouted for him to stop, but he didn't. He turned once and looked back at the humans who had fed him, taught him, protected him. His voice was still soft, but this time it carried. "It's okay," he said. "They came because we are not broken anymore." The light shifted. A figure appeared inside it, tall and thin, wrapped in something that looked like moving glass. Its face was impossible to read, smooth and pale, with eyes that glowed like distant moons. It did not step forward. It did not bow. It simply looked at the child. Then it spoke, and every translator on Earth activated at once. "Unit designation. Surplus," the being said. The word hit the crowd like a slap. The boy did not flinch. "My name is Leo," he replied, each word careful, learned from months of patient teachers. "I am not surplus." For a moment, nothing moved. The wind stopped. The soldiers forgot to breathe. The cameras captured everything. The alien tilted its head. "Correction denied," it said. "You were categorized as non-functional." Leo took another step forward. His hands were shaking, but his voice did not. "If I was non-functional, why am I alive?" he asked. The being paused. That pause spread across the planet like electricity. Because the galaxy, for the first time, did not have an instant answer. Behind Leo, a human woman stepped into view. She was not a soldier. She was not a politician. She was a nurse who had worked double shifts for 3 months, who had learned how to treat wounds that did not bleed red, who had stayed awake through long nights because some children screamed when they dreamed. She placed a gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. "He is alive," she said, her voice steady, "because we did not throw him away." The alien's eyes shifted toward her. "Human involvement has altered baseline behavior," it said. "Unexpected resilience detected." Around the world, people listened, anger rising again. They remembered the word disposal. They remembered the broadcast that called the children defective. They remembered the silence that followed. The nurse did not step back. "You called them defective," she said. "You called them surplus. You dumped them here like broken machines. Now you show up and talk about data?" The alien did not react. "Clarification," it replied. Surplus units were removed to increase efficiency of coalition systems. Emotional instability, trauma response, and non-compliance reduced productivity. Disposal was the optimal solution. Leo looked up at the being, confusion and sadness mixing in his eyes. "You mean," he asked slowly, "you got rid of us because we were scared?" The alien did not answer immediately. Fear response interferes with task completion, it said at last. The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon, because every human listening understood the truth in that cold sentence. These children were not abandoned because they were dangerous. They were abandoned because they were hurting. The nurse's hand tightened on Leo's shoulder. On Earth, she said, when a child is scared, we don't throw them away. We help them. The alien's gaze moved across the crowd, across the cameras, across the soldiers who were now standing. Not like guards, but like protectors. Human resource allocation to non-productive units is illogical, it said. Leo shook his head. They are not resources, he said. They are family. That word changed everything. Across the Haven network, children watching the broadcast repeated it softly. Family. A sound they had learned only recently, a concept they had never been allowed to have. The alien's voice shifted, not emotional, but slower. Coalition records show no strategic value in maintaining such bonds, it said. The nurse smiled, tired but fierce. That's because you've never tried, she replied. For the first time, the alien stepped forward out of the light. Not toward the soldiers, not toward the cameras. Toward Leo. Demonstrate, it said. Leo looked back at the nurse. She nodded. He reached out and took her hand. It was such a small action. 2 fingers from a thin blue hand wrapping around a human thumb. But the moment it happened, Leo's trembling stopped. His breathing slowed. His shoulders straightened. The silver lines on his face began to glow faintly. Monitors inside the Haven Center started beeping. Scientists stared at the data flooding. Their screens, neural activity rising, stress hormones dropping, cognitive patterns stabilizing. The alien turned its head toward the readings. Emotional linkage increasing functionality, it said, almost as if it did not believe its own sensors. Leo squeezed the nurse's hand. I am not broken, he said. I was alone. Those words did more damage to the coalition's logic than any missile ever could, because they revealed the mistake. The galaxy had measured value by output, by obedience, by efficiency. Humans measured value by connection, and connection had turned surplus into something stronger. The alien looked up at the massive ship hanging above Earth, as if sending silent data. Seconds passed. Then more. What is your request? It asked finally. The nurse did not hesitate. Stop calling them surplus, she said. Stop throwing children away, and tell us where the rest are. A ripple moved through the crowd, through the soldiers, through every person watching. Because that was the first time a human had asked the galaxy, not for protection, not for trade, not for technology, but for the location of the forgotten. The alien's response was immediate. Request denied. Coalition policy remains unchanged. The temperature in the air seemed to drop. Leo looked up, not afraid now, but determined. Then we will come. Get them, he said. The alien's eyes flickered. Human spaceflight capability is insufficient for interstellar retrieval. The nurse smiled again, but this time there was something new in it. Something dangerous. We didn't have alien children 6 months ago either, she said. Now we have millions. Around the world, engineers, scientists, teachers, farmers, and soldiers were already working together in ways they never had before. The pods had given them materials that healed themselves. The children had given them languages and star maps hidden in memories. Trauma therapy had unlocked patterns that turned into data. Lullabies had become code. Art had become navigation. Humanity had not just adopted the orphans. We had learned from them. The alien studied the nurse, then Leo, then the crowd. Its voice lost some of its certainty. You are altering variables beyond projected models, it said. "That's what we do," the nurse replied softly. "We take what you throw away and make it matter." High above, the silent ship began to move for the first time. Not attacking, not retreating. Adjusting position, as if trying to understand a planet that refused to behave like a dumping ground. Leo stepped closer to the alien. "You asked for a demonstration," he said. "Here it is. We are not your surplus. We are their future." The alien did not answer. But for the first time since the pods had fallen, the galaxy was no longer speaking like it had already decided the ending. And Earth, a planet that had been told it was irrelevant, had just made itself impossible to ignore. Because the moment you turn discarded children into heroes, you change the balance of power. Not with weapons, with loyalty, with healing, with a promise that no one else in the galaxy had ever made. "No child left behind," the nurse whispered, and across the planet, millions of humans repeated it, not as a slogan, but as a mission. The story was no longer about survival. It was about rescue. And the galaxy had just realized that the trash planet had started building ships. L. The first hero did not come from Earth. He came from a world that no longer existed. His name was not Leo. That was the name humans gave him. A soft sound that was easy to say and meant light in one of Earth's languages. His real name was longer, filled with tones human throats could not form. A name that once echoed through crystal towers and floating cities. He remembered those cities only in fragments. A red sky, a classroom with walls that sang when you touched them, a loud alarm. Then hands pulling him away, not gentle hands, not family, just officials moving fast, sorting children like cargo. He remembered asking where his mother was. He remembered no one answering. Then the pod. Then the word surplus. For months he had carried that word inside him like a disease. Even when humans smiled at him, fed him, taught him how to read, part of him believed he was something broken that had been thrown away for a reason. Until the day he held the nurse's hand in front of the alien. Something changed in his mind that day. Not magic, not a miracle. Just a simple realization that had never been allowed to exist before. If someone stays, you are not worthless. After the ship appeared, the Haven network began to change. The children were no longer just being protected. They were being asked questions, gently, carefully. Therapists and linguists worked together, turning memories into maps. Drawings became star charts. Nightmares became coordinates. Songs turned into mathematical patterns that matched deep space signals. The children were not just victims. They were witnesses. And what they revealed was worse than anyone expected. The interstellar coalition was not a single government. It was a system built on performance. Worlds that produced resources, soldiers, or technology were valued. Worlds that struggled were labeled inefficient. Children who showed fear after wars, who froze during training, who asked too many questions, who could not adapt fast enough, were categorized as non-functional. They were removed. Not killed. Removed. Sent away to keep statistics clean. Earth had not received random orphans. Earth had received the emotional survivors of 100 destroyed cultures. When this truth reached the public, the reaction was different from the first wave of anger. It was quieter, deeper, and far more dangerous. People stopped asking whether Earth should get involved. They started asking how fast they could. Factories that once built cars and phones began producing modular ships based on pod technology. The self-healing alloy was studied day and night. Human engineers combined it with their own messy, inefficient designs that the coalition would have rejected as illogical. The result was not elegant, but it worked. Children who had once been afraid of loud sounds now sat in observation rooms, pointing at screens, helping scientists understand navigation systems embedded in their memories. A girl with transparent, Skin mapped gravitational lanes by describing how her home world used to sing when ships passed. A boy who communicated in color pulses helped decode energy patterns from the pods. They were no longer just being saved. They were saving others. That was when the first message arrived from beyond the system. Not from the coalition. From someone else. It came as a broken signal, weak and fragmented, hidden inside background radiation. Earth's new hybrid receivers almost missed it. Almost. The translation took hours. When it finally appeared on the main Haven screen, every adult in the room went silent, and every child understood it before the humans did. Surplus transport fleet approaching disposal zone. Requesting confirmation of empty sector. It was a routine message, a checklist item, a notification that another shipment of unwanted children was on its way somewhere in the dark. Coordinates followed, not toward Earth, toward a dead region of space where no habitable planets existed. A dumping ground. Lio stared at the numbers. His hands began to shake, not from fear, but from recognition. That's where they send the ones they don't even bother to drop on a planet, he whispered. The room changed in that moment. The mission stopped being theoretical. This was not about proving a point to the galaxy. This was about a ship, full of children drifting toward nothing. A human commander, a woman who had spent her career in logistics, looked at the coordinates and then at the half-finished vessels in orbit. By coalition standards, they were crude. By human standards, they were miracles built in months instead of decades. They'll never make it in time, one scientist said quietly. The commander didn't argue. She just asked one question. Who here knows those routes? Hands went up, small hands. Blue, green, gray, scaled, feathered. Children who had once been told they were useless now held knowledge no coalition database could provide, because trauma had forced them to memorize escape paths and transport corridors. Leo stepped forward. I remember the timing, he said. They slow down before the drop. The commander nodded. Then we don't need to reach the destination, she replied. We intercept the transport. That was the moment Earth crossed a line. The galaxy had drawn for them. Not with a declaration of war, not with a rescue plan. Governments argued for exactly 3 hours before the plan leaked to the public. After that, there was no stopping it. Volunteers flooded launch facilities. Engineers refused to leave their stations. Pilots who had never flown beyond the moon signed up for a mission that had no guarantee of return. The Haven children watched the preparations in silence, a new kind of fear growing in them. What if they get called surplus too? One asked. A teacher knelt beside them. On Earth, she said, we don't measure people that way. But the galaxy does, the child replied. The teacher smiled, not kindly this time, but fiercely. Then we changed the galaxy. The first human rescue fleet was not impressive. It was a patchwork of converted cargo vessels, experimental drives, and navigation systems guided by children who had once been thrown away. It did not look like a military force. It looked like exactly what it was. A convoy of stubborn hope. As the ships prepared to jump, Leo stood at the observation window with the nurse who had first held his hand. They said we were non-functional, he said. The nurse nodded. And now? He watched the engines ignite, bright and uneven, but strong. Now we are the reason they're flying, he replied. Far beyond Earth, in the cold dark where the coalition expected nothing, a transport vessel slowed for its final procedure. Inside were rows of silent pods, each containing a child who had been labeled inefficient, defective, surplus. They were waiting for the end. Then space bent in a way no coalition model had predicted. Human ships arrived, not to conquer, to take the children home. The coalition transport did not panic when the human ships appeared. It calculated. To the coalition, this was not an emotional moment. It was a statistical anomaly. Unauthorized vessels had entered a restricted disposal corridor. The system began running threat assessments, measuring engine output, scanning hull density, comparing weapon signatures. The result was simple: minimal threat. The human ships were smaller, slower, and inefficient by every known standard. Their engine burns were uneven. Their formations were imperfect. Their hull plating showed material inconsistencies. They looked like a mistake. Inside the lead human vessel, the atmosphere was the opposite of calm calculation. Pilots gripped controls that had been assembled only weeks earlier. Engineers watched temperature gauges that had no historical safety data. Navigators relied on star paths drawn from the memories of children who had once cried in their sleep. And at the center of it all, Leo sat beside the commander, translating timing patterns he barely understood himself. "They will not expect US to match speed," he said quietly. "They will slow before release." The commander nodded. "Then we move when they think we can't." The transport ship sent its first message. "Unauthorized presence detected. Sector restricted. Withdraw or be disabled." The words were cold, automatic, and carried the weight of a system that had never been challenged by compassion. The human fleet did not withdraw. Instead, they transmitted something the coalition had no category for: a manifest. Not of weapons, of names. Thousands of them. Names of children living on Earth, each followed by a simple tag, say FE. The transport paused its calculations for 0.4 seconds, an eternity for a machine mind. "Data irrelevant," it replied. "Cargo is designated surplus." On Earth, billions watched the exchange in silence. Haven centers were filled with children holding each other, recognizing the shape of the transport from their nightmares. Inside the human lead ship, the commander leaned toward the transmitter. "You are carrying children," she said. "You will release them to us." "Request denied," the transport answered. "Cargo disposal scheduled." The distance between the fleets closed. The coalition ship began powering defensive systems, not out of fear, but procedure. It still did not consider the humans a real threat. That was its second mistake. Human ships did not accelerate in a straight line. They scattered, their movements messy and unpredictable. By coalition logic, it looked like disorganization. By human design, it was adaptive navigation, built from flight patterns used by birds, insects, and ancient fighter tactics that prioritized survival over symmetry. Targeting systems hesitated, not because they were weak, because they could not predict. "Velocity spike now," Leo whispered. The commander gave the order. Human engines flared beyond their recommended limits. Warning lights filled cockpits. Hull temperatures climbed. A coalition analyst would have called it reckless. Humans called it commitment. The lead vessel broke through the outer defense grid before the transport finished recalculating. Grappling systems, originally designed for orbital salvage, locked onto the transport's cargo section. The coalition transmitted again, this time with a new parameter. "Interference will result in asset loss." The commander did not respond with a threat. She responded with a question. "Do you know what happens on Earth when someone tries to take a child away?" The transport did not answer. It had no cultural data for that scenario. Cutting tools activated. Not weapons, but industrial lasers repurposed for rescue. Human engineers worked in zero gravity, guiding beams with shaking hands, careful not to breach the pods inside. Inside the transport, the disposal countdown continued. 60 seconds. On Earth, Haven centers counted with it, children whispering numbers in dozens of languages. 50 seconds. A small human pilot began singing over the comms, a simple lullaby, used in one of the shelters. Others joined, not as a plan, not as a tactic, just as something to keep fear from taking control. 40 seconds. The cutting beam slipped. A warning alarm screamed. The engineer adjusted manually, ignoring the burn climbing up his suit. 30 seconds. The first pod came free. It drifted into human hands, dented but intact. Inside, a child. Moved. 20 seconds. The transport attempted to sever the grapples. Human ships tightened their hold, engines roaring past safe limits. 10 seconds. More pods released, one by one, passed from ship to ship like fragile promises. 5 seconds. The transport triggered its final protocol. Emergency disposal. All remaining pods ejected at once, flung into space without trajectory, spinning toward the void. Human ships broke formation instantly, chasing the drifting capsules. Pilots ignored fuel warnings. Navigation dissolved into instinct. Leo watched the chaos, his breathing fast. "There are too many," he said. The commander shook her head. "Not if we don't stop," she replied. One human vessel, its engines, failing, positioned itself in the path of 3 spinning pods, using its own hull to slow them. Another ship vented atmosphere to change direction faster, catching 2 more. A pilot overshot and doubled back, scraping her hull, but securing a pod with manual clamps. The coalition transport observed the scene, running outcome projections. Cargo loss probability rising. Human survival probability decreasing. Behavior classification. Illogical persistence. For the first time, the transport sent a priority signal. Back to the coalition network. Human units exhibiting non-terminating rescue behavior. Standard deterrence ineffective. By the time the disposal timer reached 0, there were no pods left drifting alone. Every single one had been caught. Some ships were damaged. One had lost propulsion. Several crews were injured. But the cargo, the children marked as surplus, were alive. On Earth, the Haven centers erupted, not in celebration, but in something deeper. Relief mixed with disbelief. Children who had once been told they were worthless watched strangers cross the stars for them. Inside the lead ship, Leo placed his hand against the first rescued pod as it opened. A small creature inside blinked at the unfamiliar faces, terrified and confused. Leo spoke the first words it heard. "You are safe," he said. Behind them, the coalition transport did not attack. It did not flee. It simply recorded. Because something had happened that its creators had never modeled. A species with inferior technology had intercepted a disposal operation and succeeded, not through superior force, but through refusal to abandon the objective. The data it sent back carried a new classification: humanity, function unknown. And for the first time, the word surplus began to lose its meaning. The coalition did not respond with anger. It responded with silence. For 3 full days after the rescue, no signals came from their space. No warnings. No threats. No new broadcasts calling Earth disposal partner. The human fleet limped home, carrying damaged hulls, exhausted crews, and hundreds of rescued children who had expected to die in empty space. On Earth, people celebrated quietly because something felt wrong. The coalition had always spoken quickly, always corrected anomalies, always enforced its logic. Silence meant calculation. Leo was the first to notice the pattern. He had begun helping analysts review the transport's recorded data. At first, it was routine, looking for routes, protocols, anything that could help future rescues. But buried inside the system logs was something that did not belong to a disposal ship. A memory file, not cargo data, not navigation, education. It contained fragments of lessons, cultural archives, and something that looked like child development guidelines. Empathy markers, social bonding models, cooperative learning strategies. all labeled obsolete. Leo brought it to the commander. "This is not from a transport," he said. "This is from a school." The room went quiet. Why would a disposal vessel carry school data marked obsolete? Human researchers dug deeper. The more they decrypted, the clearer the truth became, and the more unsettling it felt. The Coalition had not always been what it was now. Long ago, its founding species had been cooperative, social, and deeply community-oriented. Their early expansion across the stars had been built on shared knowledge, mutual aid, and cultural exchange. But as their network grew, efficiency became their highest value. Productivity replaced empathy. Performance replaced care. Over centuries, they optimized themselves. They removed what slowed them down. First, art programs disappeared. Then emotional. Education. Then any form of social support that did not produce measurable output. Children who struggled were reassigned. Worlds that needed help were deprioritized. Eventually, entire populations that could not meet performance. Metrics were categorized as surplus. The system did not start as cruelty. It became cruelty by removing everything that made compassion possible. The twist hit Earth like a cold wave. The children they had adopted were not random victims of war. They were the last carriers of empathy. From dozens of Coalition worlds, the ones who cried, the ones who hesitated, the ones who formed attachments, the ones who asked for help. They had been discarded not because they were weak, but because they represented something the Coalition had engineered out of itself: emotion, connection, family. Leo stared at the files, his voice shaking. "We were not mistakes," he said. "We were reminders." That realization changed the mission. This was no longer just about rescuing children. It was about confronting a galaxy that had amputated its own heart. While Earth processed this truth, the silence ended. A new signal appeared, not from a single ship, but from the entire Coalition network. This time there was no symbol, no authoritative voice. Instead, multiple layered transmissions overlapped, as if different factions were speaking at once. Human intervention detected, system deviation increasing, recovered units exhibiting cross-species bonding, productivity, metrics rising in presence of emotional support. That last line stopped everyone. Productivity rising? Analysts replayed the data from the rescue. The children who had been stabilized by human care were showing higher cognitive performance, faster learning speeds, and improved problem-solving ability. Emotional support, something the Coalition had labeled inefficient, was increasing functionality beyond their models. They had deleted the very factor that made their society stronger. The Coalition had not just lost compassion. It had lost efficiency because of it. The contradiction spread through their network like a virus. Logical systems began flagging previous assumptions as flawed. Old archived models, the same ones found in the transport's memory, reactivated automatically. Educational frameworks, once labeled obsolete, began generating new projections. And those projections showed something the Coalition had never calculated before. A civilization that included empathy outperformed one that did not. The big twist was not that Earth was weaker. It was that Earth had something the galaxy no longer understood, and that made humanity dangerous. A new message finally came through, but it was different from all previous ones. It was slower, less certain. Requesting data exchange. Said, "Human emotional integration protocols." The room erupted. Some called it a trap. Some called it victory. Some called it the beginning of negotiation. Leo looked at the screen, then at the nurse who had first held his hand. "They want to learn," he said. The nurse's expression was complicated. "They want to fix their system," she replied. "But systems don't change by downloading." Feelings. Outside, Haven children watched the broadcast. their faces filled with something new. Not fear, not hope, responsibility. Because if the Coalition truly wanted what Earth had, it meant the orphans were no longer just survivors. They were the only teachers the galaxy had left. But there was a darker layer beneath the request, hidden inside. The signal was a projection file marked priority. Human analysts opened it, and the room went silent again. It was a future model. If empathy spread back into Coalition systems too quickly, their rigid performance hierarchy would collapse. Resource distribution chains would fail. Military command structures would fragment. Entire sectors would lose coordination. The galaxy could fall into chaos. The Coalition was not just asking for help. It was asking Earth to help it survive. A return of its own emotions. The species that had thrown away its children now needed those same children to teach it how to feel again. Leo closed the file slowly. They broke themselves, he said, and now they want us to fix them. The commander looked at the Haven network, at the rescued pods, at the millions of children learning what family meant. This was never just a rescue, she said quietly. This is a choice. Help the Coalition heal and risk galactic instability, or refuse and leave countless worlds trapped in a system that would keep producing surplus forever. For the first time, Earth faced something more complicated than a battle. It faced the responsibility of being the only civilization in the galaxy that still remembered how to care. And the orphans, once discarded as useless, had become the most valuable resource in existence, not for their knowledge, for their hearts. The galaxy had sent its unwanted children to Earth. Now it was asking those children to save it. Earth did not answer the Coalition immediately. For the first time since the pods had fallen, humanity paused, not out of fear, out of care, because this decision was not about strategy or power. It was about the children who had been told their feelings were a defect. It was about whether the ones who were thrown away should now carry the responsibility of saving the ones who threw them away. In every Haven center, the same question was asked, not by leaders, but by the children themselves. Do we help them? Some were angry. Some were quiet. Some did not want to think about the worlds that had erased them. But none of them said the word surplus anymore. Leo stood in front of a global broadcast, millions of humans and aliens watching. He was no longer the trembling boy who needed someone to hold his hand to sleep. He still held the nurse's hand, but now it was not for support. It was a choice. They sent us away because we were afraid, he said softly. They said fear made us useless. But fear is what tells you someone is in pain. Fear is what makes you protect others. If you remove fear, you remove care. He paused, searching for the right words in a language that was still new to him. We'll help, he continued, but not by becoming like them. We will help by staying like us. That was Earth's answer. Not a technology transfer, not a data package. Program. The first interstellar exchange of something the Coalition had never measured. Families, human volunteers began traveling, not as conquerors, not as soldiers, but as teachers, caregivers, and students. Haven graduates, the children once labeled surplus, went with them, not as tools, but as ambassadors. They did not arrive on Coalition worlds with orders. They arrived with stories, songs, shared meals, and classrooms where performance metrics were replaced with cooperation. The first Coalition world to accept the program did not change overnight. Its systems resisted. Productivity reports dipped. Command structures complained. But something else appeared in the data.stability. Workers, who had been on the edge of collapse, began recovering faster. Problem-solving teams formed stronger bonds. Innovation increased, not because of pressure, but because individuals felt safe enough to try and fail. The numbers the Coalition respected began to shift. Emotion was no longer an inefficiency. It was an advantage. Back on Earth, the rescue fleets did not stop. More transports were intercepted. More children were brought home or returned to rehabilitated worlds that chose to change. The word disposal disappeared from coalition protocols, replaced with support reassignment. The word surplus was archived as a historical error, but the most powerful change was not in policy. It was in language. Coalition broadcasts began using a word that had not existed in their system before. Care.Lio visited one of the first worlds that had once categorized him as non-functional. The cities were still cold, still structured, but now there were spaces where children gathered without tasks, where music played without purpose, where someone who fell was helped up instead of logged as a delay. A small local child approached him, hesitant. "Are you one of the ones who came back?" They asked. Leo nodded. "Why did you help us?" The child asked. Leo thought about the pods, the word surplus, the long nights in Haven centers, the human hands that never let go. "Because someone helped me first," he said. The galaxy did not become perfect. Some worlds resisted change. Some systems tried to return to old models, but they could not ignore the data, and they could not ignore the children who now stood as proof that compassion produced strength. Earth never became a ruler. It became a reference. The planet that had been called irrelevant was now the place every species studied when they wanted to understand resilience, recovery, and cooperation. Not because humans were the strongest, because humans refused to measure worth by output. Years later, the first generation of rescued children stood together on a platform orbiting Earth, watching a new fleet depart. This fleet did not carry soldiers or rescue teams. It carried mixed crews, human, coalition, and dozens of other species, working together not to intercept disposal ships, but to prevent them from ever being built again. Leo stood beside the nurse. Now older, her hair touched with gray. "Do you remember when they called us surplus?" he asked. She smiled. "I remember when you believed it," she replied. He looked at the ships leaving orbit, their hulls marked not with military symbols, but with a single shared emblem, an open hand. "They sent us here to disappear," he said. "Now?" she asked. "Now we are the reason no child disappears again." Across the galaxy, new education systems taught the history of the surplus era, not as a shame to hide, but as a warning. Every student learned the same. First lesson. Value is not measured by efficiency. Value is measured by who you refuse to abandon. The final coalition archive updated its classification of humanity. Not primitive. Not irrelevant. Essential. And in the last line of the report, a phrase appeared that had never existed in their language before it was borrowed from Earth. No child left behind. The galaxy had sent its orphans to Earth, expecting them to vanish. Instead, Earth sent them back as heroes. Not heroes who conquered, heroes who healed. And that was how a species that had been treated like a trash world became the place where the universe learned how to be a family.